Welcome back. We're going to be registering users, but to make life easier on us down the road, we want to make sure we make some checks first. So let's start with usernames. So with our username, we want to make sure it looks a particular way. So we wouldn't want it to be, say, for instance, just one letter long. So we want to tell the user like, hey, it needs to be between a particular length. Also, we want our username to be of a, just alphanumeric characters. Let's say, for instance, we don't want just a bunch of exclamation points, for our user. So we say, hey, only alphanumeric characters. Also, when it comes to validating our password, we want to make sure, it's a good password. We don't want something lousy like 1234. We hit submit. We want to say, hey, that's an insecure password. Please try again. Also, just because it has a whole bunch of letters doesn't mean it's a good password. So let's say we put the letter A in there a whole bunch of times. That's not going to be a good password. That's going to be easily guessed by somebody. So again, we want to say, hey, we need a better password. And let's say that we want to check the email as well. So we want to make sure that, for instance, if there's a syntax error, well, we want to go ahead and, let them know, hey, we ran into a syntax error. Also, if there's a disposable domain, we don't want to use that either. So let's say here's one of them, for instance, we shouldn't allow. Sorry, we do not accept disposable domains either. This would be a big one. Say, for instance, they lose their password. We have no way to, set a new password for them because that email address is just going to expire real quickly. And we can also set the suggestion on there as well. Let's say, for instance, let's go with Jane here, and let's say Gmail too. That's not a real domain. That one's not going to work either. Let's say, again, let's go with Jane, but let's give it something.com, but let's give it I don't want nothing but letters in here. A domain that we know that doesn't exist. Say, hey, the DNS doesn't exist, please check, look for another one. Well, I think that about covers it. So let's go ahead and create a new one here. Make sure I have my right password. So if I go over to MySQL Workbench, go ahead and update this. So we only have one user so far. Actually, let's see what happens on a user already exists. So we wouldn't want someone creating an account under your username. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen. So let's put in Carlton here, and yes, username already taken. Please try another. So if we go back to the MySQL Workbench, you can see here, it's one of them that we've used from a previous lesson here. But anyway, we have Carlton, so we're going to go ahead and create a new one here. So when I hit submit, it's going to go ahead and go through all those checks again, and then we're going to go ahead and create a new user and send an email to that email address. We want to make sure we have an email address that works. Let's go ahead and hit submit. Okay. Check for account verification email. So if we go back to our workbench and we go ahead and run our query to select all, there we go. So we have our user put in here. So we have our password hash, which we'll use to verify our password. We also have our verification hash, which is for our email. And yes, that beep is that sound was, we just got our email. And this one's going to be for verifying our email. So if we go to our email here, we have our email right here. And if we click on this, it's going to go ahead and verify our user. Now, one thing I forgot to mention is active is just saying, hey, have we verified this user yet? Are we allowing them to do everything a verified user could do on the site? So there may be some things you wouldn't allow them to create or do just yet. But anyway, let's go ahead and go back to here. And if we look at this, let's go ahead and take a closer look here. So if I click on this, so we have our hyperlink here. If we look at the href attribute here, we have http localhost 8080, and this is the path we're going to be taking, email verification, username, and then our verification password, which we'll be able to check versus that verification hash in the database. So anyway, so let's go ahead and click on this, and what it should do is change this from is active from a 0 to a 1. So we're going to go ahead and click on that. Go ahead and confirm. Account active. Let's go ahead and go back to our database, and we're going to go ahead and refresh. There we go. And we are now active. So let's go ahead and go to our code. Now, our project is getting bigger, and it no longer makes sense to keep all of our Golang code in a single file. So everything is still in a single folder, which we've named register, but we have a whole bunch of different files here. As we look, we still have main.go, and it is, of course, package main. And then we have some other ones here, which are also part of package main, but just in a different file. So everything here, for instance, like store doesn't need to be capitalized because it's part of the same package. Package main, different file. That's okay because it's still part of package main. Anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at the layout. Now, we went ahead and we still have our templates folder here, but we've went ahead and created a layouts, private and public. So public's just going to be a folder for all the stuff where the user doesn't need to be logged in. So if I'm looking for something in a template where the user isn't logged in, doesn't need to be logged in, well, I would go ahead and look in here. For the HTML templates where the user does need to be logged in, I'm going to look for private. And then for my layouts, say for headers, footers, or just a navigation bar, well, this would be a good place to put that as well. We really don't need it so much yet, but this will give us some space to grow our project and keep it organized as we go. Let's just go ahead and take a look at some of the other package parts of package main inside the auth.go. This is for authentication. So this is our middleware for authenticating users. This way we don't have to have this in every single one of our handlers. And then we have db.go is just for our database connection information. So we don't have to worry about that. And of course, yes, we need to make sure we bring in the SQL package as well as our drivers. For sending emails, we went ahead and just put this all into the same folder. Sorry, same file, which is also part of main.go. And with env.go, I think of that as short as for environmental variables. Now, instead of looking for all of these across many different files, I thought it would make more sense just to have it in one file, making it easier for the user. Say if they're going to go ahead and spin up a remote machine, they know what variables they need to go ahead and set up. Being that everybody has their own domain for whatever their domain is, we want to go ahead and have that. Server location, I just have some information, whether I'm going to plug in, say, for instance, on the email, localhost, say if it's local. So he's going to go ahead and plug in localhost, so we can send that link, create that link for localhost, so as you can see in this demonstration. Or if it's remote, it's going to go ahead and put that together as well. We need to know if it's HTTPS, if you are on a remote, you're remotely hosting this somewhere, as opposed to HTTP, so that way that link gets created correctly. Entity name is just, hey, like for me, it'd be grow adept instead of growadept.com. Anyway, we have our MySQL setup stuff. So, who's the user logging in for that connection, the password, the address, and the port, the name of the database that we'll be accessing in there. And then we're using our Gmail for this. So this is different than from the website. So we have a from email here and who the SMTP password is for that. A little bit of head up for everybody who's using Google. If you're using a less secure app, those are no longer used. I believe those were disallowed last month. So just make sure you make a app password, and you should still be fine. And we also have of course, our main.go where our application starts. and went ahead, as we get more types, we could just go ahead and plug them all into the same file, make it a little easier to know where we're looking for that. And all of our methods for user is going to be in this one. So there's quite a few of them in there. You don't have to set up your project like this. It's all up to you. So do what makes sense to you. Now we have some setup code here. For instance, our constant minimum entropy bits is going to be used for creating our passwords. We want to make sure a password is complex as measured by how much entropy it has. So if it's not at least 60, it's not going to allow it. So this is going to keep us from having really simple passwords and force the users to use a more complex one. We're going to go ahead and set up our email verifier, which is going to make sure it's a good email address. So that way we're not sending it somewhere where we're never going to hear back from. Anyway, so we set up our email verifier. We're going to go ahead and enable domain suggest. Let's say, for instance, it was gmail2.com. Doesn't exist. It's going to say, hey, you sure this wasn't Gmail? And we're going to check to see if we're using a remote or a local machine. Server location, server lock. We set this up over here in EMV using the os.getEnvironmental variable. Find out where our server location, what we have set there. And if it is, well, then we're going to go ahead and enable SMTP check. So we want this disabled if we're using our home computer, but if we're using it on a hosting service, it's going to be allowed because port 25 is blocked at home ISPs. But say if you're going up on Linode or something, well, either port 25 is not blocked or you could just open it up. Oh, I think that we actually enabled domain suggest twice. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of that one. And we have a function here for display email domain. So that's going to go ahead and return that. Let's go ahead and take a look at that one here. So disposable email list. So basically, we don't want them giving us a disposable email. For instance, if they forget their password for password retrieval, they're going to need a valid email. So we need something that isn't just going to disappear on us. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and open up a file, which is going to have a whole bunch of disposable emails, as we have right here in our directory. And this one only has about 3,000 or so of these disposable email domains. But you can, if you really want to, you could find some with tens of thousands if you really want to get real strict with that. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and open up this package. And I'm using must for disposable email domains. And the reason I'm using must is that I'm going to be using panics if I run into an issue. So if this doesn't open, I'll go ahead and just shut the whole program down right there. And we're going to defer close. Then we're going to go ahead and scan that. And for each item in there, we're going to go ahead and scan it and append it to this variable right here. And we're just, well, what was already in there, we're going to go ahead and append to it, as well as this item for this particular cycle through our loop. Anyway, and then we're going to go ahead and return that. Go back to the top here. Okay, and so this will be used so we're not, users can't sign up using a disposable email domain. Like we used, what was it, zzz.com is a disposable domain, so that one was not allowed. And then we're going to also say, hey, add disposable domains. We're passing it in right here so that our verifier can say, hey, we're not going to use any of those domains. We're going to fire up our router or return our engine using gen.default. And this is going to be, of course, using all of our routing. We're going to use the load HTML blob, and this is going to parse all of our templates. So again, everything is in the templates folder here. We're saying any folder inside of there, so layouts, private and public, are going to go ahead and get parsed. And then anything inside of that folder, as long as it ends in .html, well, it's going to go ahead and parse it. As you can see, everything here is .html, so we're going to be fine. We're not going to go over login because we've already done that one in a previous video. We're going to be concerned with /register. And as you can see, since someone's registering, obviously they don't need to go through this router group, because that's just for people who are already logged in for, say, they're going to look at their profile. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and look at the handler for the register get handler, which this one is just simply going to render our template. So we're going to say, hey, status code OK, register.html, and we're not passing any information. So if I take a look at it here, it's just register.html right here in the public. If we have a message, say if we run into an issue like we were before, we're just going to go ahead and communicate that back. And then if we're passing in user, well, we know that we went ahead and filled out those fields before. And say if something went wrong, we had to display a message, we can just pass that back, and then it'll pass that username and email right back in there. And we're just going to have them fill the password in every single time. Anyway, let's go back to main.go. So this is going to render that template. And then, of course, when they hit the submit, it's again going to be at /register, but the method for this is going to be post. So being that's going to be post, we look at our routes again. Again, we have /register, but this one's going to handle the post request. So we are assigning a different handler to that. So we have our register post handler here. So if we go to that. And like we said, we're going to do a lot of those things like we were saying earlier. So we're going to be, validating the username, the password, the email, taking a look at this. We're going to, of course, use on the gen context, we're going to use the post form method to grab our username and save that into our user variable. So looking at our user variable, we have ID, username, email, password, hash create at active, verification hash, and timeout. So going back to this, we're going to go ahead and grab those 3 inputs from our form. We're going to go ahead and save that into those fields on user. And then we're just going to use all these methods that we've created for user. That way, it just makes it a little bit easier. Say if I forget it, I can just use the IntelliSense, let it kind of finish it. Be like, oh yeah, I have this method for anything used with the user. And I don't even have to pass in the parameters being they're already saved into these fields here. So we're going to go ahead and validate username. So this, now we're still in package main instead of the file main.go, which is part of package main. Now we're in users.go, which is still part of package main. So validate username. Looking at this. So we're going to go ahead and range through that field username. So we're going to go ahead and range through each one of them. And we want to know if we want to make sure this is only alphanumeric characters. So no question marks, no exclamation points, nothing like that. We want, reasonably looking usernames. So if that character, if it's not one of these, these 2 conditions, if they're both true, because we got our and here, well, then we're going to go ahead and return this error. And then so if any one of these return an error, we're just going to send them back to register.html. We're going to give them that message. So these errors that we're passing back are user safe in this situation. And then we're passing back user. And like we said, they can make sure. So that's supposed to be user. Oh no, that's supposed to be you. Sorry, was correct. But anyway, so we're just going to pass in that information so we can fill those fields back in. Go ahead and go back to what we're looking at there on users. So Unicode is letter is going to check to see, reports whether the rune is a letter. And this one says if it is a number. So if it's a number and it is, so if it's, so we need, just one of these, we need to make sure just one of these cases passes through. So let's say if it is a letter, this is going to return, I believe it says true. Reports whether the rune is a letter. So this is going to return true. If that is true, well, then this exclamation point is going to go ahead and turn that to false. And so it has to be both of these true, being it's an and statement. Well, then this chunk of code is not going to run here. So if we have a letter, that's going to give us a false here. That's not going to fault us out. And then of course, if it is a number, well, then that's also, that would be true, which would turn this to false. And so we'll be able to continue down into the code. So as long as one of those conditions, you know, alphanumeric, it's as long as it's a letter or a number, we're going to be fine. But say if it was an exclamation point, well, that's going to be false, and that would return true. Say if we had an exclamation point, for our character, well, that's also going to be false. And then the exclamation point here is going to go ahead and turn that true as well. So you'd get two trues, and then so that's how we're not going to be using ampersands or anything like that. We're also going to go ahead and check to make sure that the username is of the length that we want. So it needs to be greater than or equal to 5, and it also, the length of it needs to be less than or equal to 50. So both of those need to be true so we can return nil. Now, if it is not nil, we're going to say, hey, it wasn't within those bounds, so okay, we have an issue. So, and like we said, if it returns error, well, the error is not going to be nil, and we'll go back to that register page. We're also going to validate our password. So if we take a look at that, we'll see if we would get an error back for that. So validate password. Again, these errors are safe to use with client. Be real specific if you're going to do that. You wouldn't want to pass errors if, say, it was something to deal with the database, for instance. So we're going to go ahead and validate the password, and we're using this password validator package at GitHub, Wagslane, Go password validator. So if you don't have that, make sure you go get that. And this is just going to check for a level of entropy. So you could actually have something that doesn't have uppercase or lowercase, or any of these crazy characters, as long as it has enough entropy, like it could literally be all just letters and no numbers even, as long as it has a high enough entropy score, minimum entropy, we're going to be just fine. So we don't care if it has a whole bunch of crazy characters in it. We just care it's a highly complex password. So anyway, so if everything runs fine and it does meet that minimum threshold for entropy, well, we're going to go ahead and return the error. The error will be nil, and we won't run this code here. And again, if there wasn't enough complexity, entropy was too low, well, then we're going to go ahead and pass that message that we had there and pass in that data, pass in the field information so those can be filled back out. Also going to go ahead and validate our email. So we're going to do a couple different things here. We're going to go ahead and use verifier, and that verifier we set up in main.go at the top, where we're going to go ahead and use the verify method, and we're going to go ahead and pass in that particular email, which is of course on our email field on our user struct. So we're going to take our result. First, we're going to see if this ran correctly. If it didn't, well, we're just going to go ahead and say verify email failed. Here's the error, and we're going to go ahead and pass an error back. Then we're also going to go ahead and check for syntax. So we have our syntax field, which has a method, another field, which is Boolean. So when that runs, it sets this field. Either the syntax is valid or it is not. And if it is not, exclamation point makes this true. We run this piece of code. We're going to go ahead and send the user back to that form. So we're going to return an error, and then the user is going to say, hey, email address syntax is invalid. Also don't want disposable. So we're also going to check that field, which was set when we ran the verify method, and say, hey, sorry, we don't accept disposable emails. Go ahead and return that back. And if you're looking at that, we're actually returning a status code. Most of these are pretty much the same. One of them is internal server error. One of them's bad request, would be the user, put in something that's not acceptable. So like looking at this, we could, when we run this, we're just going to pass in that status code that was returned, and that error. If it is a domain, if it knows it's a domain that doesn't exist, well, then it's going to go ahead and put a suggestion. It's going to populate this field with that suggestion. Otherwise, if it doesn't have something to suggest, it's going to be blank. But if it does suggest something, it knows that's not one that's real. So we're just going to go ahead and pass that along as well and say, hey, email address was not reachable, looking for whatever that suggestion was. Instead, maybe we can help out the user there. Possible return string values. So was it reachable? Was it not? It's either going to be yes, no, or unknown. And if it's just flat no, we'll say email address is not reachable. Now this this code here, if again, oh wait, no, sorry, this one can run. I was thinking of another different piece of code. But anyway, this one's just going to check to see if there is an MX record for that domain. If that record doesn't exist, well, that's going to be a problem. So anyway, we're just going to let them know domain enter did not properly set up to receive emails. MX record not found. But if all of these are okay and none of them trigger, well, we're just going to pass back status code okay and say our error was nil. So that covers validating our email. We're also going to go ahead and check to see if our user exists, because if someone already has it, they can't have that particular username. We're just setting it true. We're going to go ahead and select ID from users where username is equal to whatever we're going to go ahead and pass in there. bb.query row, query row because we're just returning one row. We have our statement from up here that we're passing in, as well as our username, which is going to be filling this question mark right here. We have our user ID, and we're going to go ahead and scan to see if we had an error. And if that one does not exist, we're going to get SQL.error no rows. So if they picked a unique username, well, we're going to go ahead and get this error no rows, which is what we're looking for, and we'll return false. Otherwise, if we return exists regularly, well, then it's just going to be true. Anyway, so going back to our code. So for it to work, we obviously want them to pick something unique, but if they don't, we're just going to let them know, hey, send them back to, say, hey, bad request, register HTML, and for our message, username taken, please try another. Then we're going to go ahead and create our user password hash and save user data. So, and we have this method new, which is just going to go ahead and create our new user. So hopefully we return nil if everything runs fine, but if we run into an error, we will return that error. So we're going to use bcrypt to generate from password. We're going to use our user password field, and we're just going to go ahead and create our hash for us. Now, we're just using the bcrypt default cost. As computers get more advanced, the default will have to be increased, or if you're just a little extra paranoid, go ahead and increase that number as well. If we run into an issue, we're to go ahead and return error, and of course that will send the user back to the page, but that would be one of our errors. We're going to go ahead and set created at for time.now, and we're going to go ahead and use local. And now we're going to go ahead and create our email verification password and hash. So we can create this however we want. We don't have to ask the user for this. So we're going to go ahead and make it, pretty secure. So we want to go ahead and grab a whole bunch of random letters and numbers, 64 to be precise. And to make sure we get our randomness, we're going to go ahead and use, random.int, which is deterministic, means, if I put, a particular number in, I'm going to get the exact same thing out every single time. So I want something unpredictable to seed this. So we're going to use time.now to go ahead and set our seed. And we're going to use unix.nano. And this returns t as Unix time, the number of nanoseconds elapsed since January 1st, 1970. So nanoseconds, I believe, yes, that is like down to 1/1000th of a second. So, uh, be very difficult for anyone to guess exactly down to the billionth of a second. Now, this operation ran on some remote machine. So, anyway, so we're going to go ahead and create a slice of rune, which is going to have all of our letters and numbers that could be possibilities for this password. We're going to go ahead and make our email verification random runes, which is going to be 60 with a capacity of 64. And we're going to go ahead and range. We're going to use our for loop. We're going to cycle 64 times. And for each one of those, we're going to take this email verification rune, which is a slice of rune. Well, we're going to start off at index 0 because I is equal to 0. And we're going to go ahead and it's going to go ahead and just keep incrementing until we get to 63 and stop at 64, since 64 is not greater than 64. So this is going to run 0 through 63. And that's going to go ahead and fill all the indexes inside of our slice of rune. Anyway, so we're going to take our alphanumeric runes here, as we got, all the letters and all the numbers. Well, we're going to go ahead and grab an index there. So if this final number was 0, it's going to be A, or 63, it's going to be 0. But anyway, we want this to be random. So we're using the math rand package, to create our random number. Int n, it returns as an int a non-negative pseudo-random number in half open interval from the default source. So basically, it's either going to be 0 or up to the number that we provided. So we don't want to have anything higher than what's possible for our indexes. So we're going to say, hey, let's find the length of this here, which is going to be 64 minus 1 to be 63. So even if this randomly comes up with the highest number it's allowed to, 63 would still, it's still going to fall within this index here. So we could, pull a 0, 63 would give us the number 0. If we put an index 0, like we said, we get the letter A. But anyway, this will run 64 times. We'll fill this up with a random sequence here. And we're going to go ahead and look at some of that. So here's our password that we created. Nothing but these letters and numbers that we have here. And we have our hash in bytes. And let's go ahead and here. And we're going to go ahead and generate our password using our email verification password. See down here, we're using the same cost. So it's going to go ahead and create our, our email verification password hash for verifying our email. And of course, we run an error. If we run an error, we're going to go ahead and return that error. And then again, we'll just send them back to that register page. Go ahead and stringify our email verification hash. And we're going to go ahead and set a timeout when the user needs to register. We're going to use local time, and we're going to go ahead and add. So this is going time.now returns, of type time.now, which we can run the local on that, which is going to go ahead and, set the, which is going to return t with the location set to the local time. And then we're going to use add date, which is going to allow us to add time to this. Now notice the last one is days, and we're adding, so we're going to give the user 2 days to verify this. Come to think about it, I may not actually have this code in here at the time of filming this. My bad. Also, we're going to do a couple different things. We're going to go ahead and send that email as well. So we're going to go ahead and put this in the database, but say if we run into an error sending that email, well, we want to go ahead and retract any of those changes. So we're going to go ahead and use a transaction instead of using, just our database connection variable. We're going to use transaction instead. So we're going to go ahead and begin our transaction. We run into any issue, well, we can just use transaction.rollback, that method, and it's going to roll back any changes, anything that's been inserted to the database. Well, if it doesn't get to transaction.commit, if it hits rollback instead, well, it's going to roll it all back. But if it does hit commit, well, those changes will be committed, and then they'll be there for good. So we'll run transaction.commit after we know everything is good to go. Anyway, so we have database.begin, and that's going to go ahead and create our transaction. run into an issue. We're going to go ahead and roll back. So we're going to run this method transition dot roll back. You're not going to run into a whole lot of errors with this usually, but anyway, we're going to go ahead and check for that error anyway. So if this is not equal to nil, if error is not equal to nil, and it's just saying, hey, run this part 2 first, assign it to here, and then say, hey, is that error that you just returned, is it not equal to nil? Say, hey, we're going to go ahead and say what our error was. So that way, just for our own troubleshooting purposes. And we're going to return an error from this function should we run into an issue. And we're going to go ahead and defer that rollback. Say, make sure that rollback happens should we never actually hit that tx.commit method. We're going to go ahead and prepare our statement. So we're going to insert into users these fields: username, email, password created at is active, verification hash, timeout, as you can see here. And we have one of these question marks for each one of these for everything that we're going to be passing in down there. Again, we're going to go ahead and check to see if we run into any issues preparing the statement. We're going to roll back if not, and we're also going to make sure we defer, insert statement close, make sure that statement closes. We're going to go ahead and execute our statement. And for each one of those question marks, we're going to go ahead and pass in a value. So we're going to pass in our username, our email, our hash for our password, when it was created, or is active was here, as that was first a 0. We're just setting that automatically to 0 right off the bat, just so that way the user has to verify their email should they want to get access to particular things on the website. And we have our verification hash for our email and our timeout as well. We're going to check to make sure the rows affected better not be 0, else we're going to return an error. We're also going to make sure there wasn't an error, else we're going to go ahead and roll back. So actually, if that is 0, we do need to, could be wrong, but need to roll back. We're going to go ahead and send our email. So if our server location is local, like I said, we're just going to go ahead and pass in our local host. So we're going to go ahead and send that email. They're going to click on a link. It's going to have the username and the verification password. When that comes back to us, we're going to go ahead and handle that information coming in, check if it's right, and then go ahead and set their account to is active if that all is correct. If it's not local, if they're using HTTPS, we're going to make sure our link is made correctly, depending if it's HTTPS or if it's just HTTP. Subject is email verification, and we're creating our body here. So it's just going to say, hey, click link to verify email. And on our link, domain name is going to go ahead and go here. And then the path that is just going to be email verification. Then we're going to go ahead and look for username, email, password. We're going to grab those out of there later on, verify they are who they say they are. So, and we went ahead and printed that down here in case you wanted to look at that. Then we're going to go ahead and send the email, which is in a different package. Like I said, we put everything into email.go. And so we have this send email, which takes our subject and our HTML body, and it'll go ahead and send that email on our behalf. We are using for our SMTP server who's hosting this, was going to be gmail.com, and they use port 587. And we're going to go ahead and create our address, use our host and our port. And then for our plain authentication, from email, SMTP, password, and our host. Entity name, we set that environmental variable, just whatever our entity is, and we don't want like .com on there. We just want just that name there. From email, where we're sending it from, and we're user.email because we're sending it to the user, and the subject, which we had passed in here and we set up when we ran the function. And then adding on our HTML body, which we passed in as well, which had our, our H1 tags and our hyperlink. Then SMTP is going to go ahead and send mail. If we have an error, we're going to go ahead and log. Actually, we want to return this error. We run into an issue. We want to make sure we send the user back to that register page. Anyway, let's go back to users.go. So if we send it, if we run into an error, that's going to go ahead and trigger this code here. And we're going to go ahead and roll back, set the error here, say, hey, if the error is not equal to nil, we're just going to print a message to ourselves and say, hey, this is what we ran into trying to roll back. And like I said, if the email was sent fine, everything goes fine, well, we want to go ahead and commit those changes in the database, make them permanent. So on the transaction, we're going to go ahead and run the commit method. And we're going to go ahead and see if we had an error on that commit. And should we have an error, well, we're going to go ahead and run this code here, roll everything back, pass that error back. And then, of course, then the user is going to go ahead and be sent back to that register.html page. If everything's fine in creating the user gets created, the email gets sent, and we're going to go ahead and return nil. So back to main.go. If new runs fine, we'll go ahead and run this here. But let's say if there was an error, let's say, hey, we had this error trying to register this user for ourselves. We're going to pass this errors.new. There was an issue creating account. Please try again. We're going to send them back to the register page with that error passed in. Now, but if everything's fine, we're going to go ahead and say, hey, status code okay. Send them to register success.html. See here, it's going to say check account for email verification. And then we're not passing anything in. Let's go ahead and see, did we? Okay, so yeah, we did activate that account. So, looking at this in short again, now just the get request for /register is going to go ahead and give us that registration page. And we're going to go ahead and check several different things. We're going to have to deal with them later to make sure we got actual, the best chance of getting an actual email address, and it's, a reasonably looking username, for instance, and things like that, which would all be handled at /register for post, which would be a register post handler we just looked at. Now, when we clicked that link in our email, it was at localhost /email ver. We had username and verification password. So let's go ahead and take a look at the handler we have set for that. So email verification handler. So let's back and that. So this link right here, as you can see, email verification. So we had our username and then that verification password. So that's where, we're grabbing both of those when we're clicking that link. So let's do that. So again, we're going to use the gen.context. We're going to use the param method, and it's going to allow us to grab username and password as shown above. Username was after the first, was in the slash before that, and verification password was one to the right of that. Anyway, we're going to use get user by username because we want to go ahead and get the user's password for that. Because we have to verification password. Because we have to email verification password hash. We got to check that versus this verification password that we have coming in. Take a look at that. That's over in users.go. All of our user methods are. And this one's just getting our user information. So it's going to go ahead and select all from users where username is equal to uh, the username field. So we're going to go ahead and grab a row, pass in our statement, pass in our username. We're going to go ahead and scan all of that. If we have an error, we'll let them know. And we're going to go ahead and just return nil if everything goes fine. So that's how we're getting all of that. That's how we're getting all these fields populated. And if we have an issue, well, we're going to say unauthorized. Now, send them to register.success.html, but we're going to have this message. Obviously, we're not going to set them to active. We're just giving the message, please try link in verification email again. But let's say we get the user information. And then we will go ahead and run bcrypt, compare hash and password, because we're going to go ahead and check that user verification hash for our email. And we're going to look at that versus the link verification password. So that password that we passed in via that link that they clicked on, we're going to check that what we had in the database. So if error is equal to nil, well, that's a success. It is, they are who they say they are. We're going to go ahead and make them active. If there's an issue trying to make them active, we'll send them back to the page again. Say, hey, we ran into an issue. But if everything was great and we were able to make them active, we're going to go ahead and send them to the account activated HTML page where there's no issue. And this one's just going to say account activated. Let's go ahead and take a look at make active real quick. Again, this is a method on user, so it's over here. So make active is going to go ahead and just create a statement. So prepare, update users, set active where ID is equal to this. Turn the error, handle the error, defer statement at close, make sure it gets closed. We're going to go ahead and execute it, check if there was an error, return that error if so. So this is just going to go ahead and change that one value. So basically update user set is active, and we're going to set it equal to true, where before it was false. With MySQL, I believe it just saves it as a 0 and a 1, so that's why we were looking at that earlier. So if everything was good, send them to that page saying, hey, everything was great. But if there was an error, well, we're going to say, hey, unauthorized. We'll send them to the register success HTML. We're just going to say, hey, please try the link in the verification email again. So it would say, it would give that extra message here saying, hey, go ahead and try that link again. And go back to the top here. So in review, the get requested / register is just going to give us the form so they can register. Post is going to go ahead and take the information, check and make sure that it is good to use. If everything's great, then we're going to go ahead and send that email. And when they click on that link in the email to verify their email, well, it's going to go through this path of email verification. It's going to have that username, that verification password, which we put in that link ourselves when we created that template that's passed into that email. And then we're going to go ahead and the email verification get handler is going to go ahead and handle that. But anyway, a little bit wordy. Sorry about that. Hope you enjoyed the content. If you like the content, please support the channel by giving it a big thumbs up. I just want to say a big thanks to everyone who has been supporting the channel. It really helps out, and just thank you a lot. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.